Greetings viewers and welcome to my channel. And today's video is a compare between the Peavey VB-3 all-tube bass amplifier and its successor, the Peavey VBMA, also known as the MA300 or the Michael Anthony signature version. A little bit of history on these amplifiers. To my understanding, the VB-3 came out in 2007-2008. It was the flagship for Peavey on their bass amplifiers. And later production models actually have this rhino liner. The earlier production models have the black Tolex, similar to what's on my 210 there. And it was being used by Michael Anthony of Chickenfoot on the first tour. He really liked the amps. Peavey came to him afterward and said, "Hey, do you want to make a signature model?" And he said, "Sure." So he wanted to make the changes. And then later on, the VBMA came out. And again, this was the first tube amplifier to have a switch mode power supply, and meant to be an alternative to the SVT Classic from Ampeg, which weighs anywhere from 80 to 95 pounds. And that's really where the history of this amplifier started. It wasn't until much later that the VBMA came out, but they were just made in very, very small quantities. And I was told that less than 50 of those amplifiers were ever made. And that to me it's not too surprising, because right around the time that these amplifiers were being manufactured, Peavey Electronics was going through a change, and their operations were ceasing in the United States and moving over to China. And I read somewhere on Talkbase, one of the posts said that Hartley Peavey did not want to have these particular amplifiers made in China due to their complexity. It's not something that you can easily do. Apparently there's some technical stuff about the switch mode power supply in order to get the output filtered properly so that it doesn't create excessive noise, in order for it to work properly with the vacuum tubes. That may have something to do with why an amplifier with this type of architecture hasn't been done since Peavey had put these out. And to me, it's a bit of a shame, because the technology is there. I just don't think that other amp manufacturers are doing it, either because of cost or lack of interest. But to me, I think that these amps are a piece of history. It's just goes to show you that there's manufacturers that are out there that were willing to take a chance and to innovate these type of amplifiers that have a very light power supply, and made it much easier on your back when you were moving these things around, and they happen to be all tube powered. Unfortunately, I don't think these amplifiers got a good fair shake when they were new in the store. It was a very new type of amplifier, being so light and with the switch mode power supply. I don't think a lot of people took these amplifiers very seriously, and also the cost of them was prohibitively expensive. But it was also, you got to understand, it was a handmade amplifier made in the USA. And there's something to say about that. At least I think, I value that, and I'm sure others do as well. But because of those factors, these really didn't get a widespread market share, and you don't see them much on the market at all anymore. You do see the VB-3 come up on Reverb and eBay every now and then. I do see a few, but the VBMA, being such even a lower production model, I have not been able to find that for a very, very long time. So what I'd like to do is, in this video, I want to go over the technical specifications of each amplifier. I want to go through a few of the technical glitches that I found with each of the amplifiers. The VB-3 has a few more than the VBMA does, how to fix them, how to work around them, and really just give my opinion of what I think of these amplifiers and my experience with them. And yes, I will also put some sound samples here at the end of the video, and you can check them out on how they sound between the clean and dirty channels and the unique blend channel that is available on the VBMA. Here we're going to start off with the VB-3. So the VB-3 in the preamp has 3 12AX7s, 2 AT7s, and the second AT7 and third 12AX7 is located on the power board. Really, you have V1, V2, and V3 for the preamp. So the V1 and V2 are 12AX7s, and V3 is the 12AT7. On the power board, you have a choice of either 8 EL34s, 8 6L6 power tubes. You can also put in the 6CA7s, which is essentially an equivalent of the EL34, but it's not really a true pentode. It's actually what they call a beam tetrode. And that is the type of tube that I would like to have in this amplifier at some point. Right now, this amplifier still has the stock Ruby tubes from China that it came with from the factory. It's the EL34 BHT. On the preamp panel here, we have the input. We have a 15 dB pad for your active basses, your bright switch. I think it adds a little treble at 8,000 hertz there. You have your mute, and then what it'll start off with is the input. Will then go to your pre-volumes of either your clean channel or your dirty channel. From there, it'll then move over to the compressor. Now, this compressor is unique in the sense that you have an enable and defeat, but it's only one knob. And it actually is very useful. However, it can get very, very sensitive. After, say, 2 or 3 on the dial here, it gets heavily, heavily compressed, almost to the point where you really can't use it. And I think that was probably the biggest complaint with the use of this compressor. It's just you need to know how to use it. I don't know what the individual settings are. This is an all-tube compressor circuit inside. It is actually an optical compressor, but it's run by V2 inside the preamp. V1 handles the clean and the overdrive channels respectively. From the compressor, it'll then run over to this passive 3-band EQ. Passive meaning that it only cuts the frequencies. It does not actually boost those frequencies. You have a low cut here, and that's helpful if you have, say, double coil humbucker pickups, for example, that have a lot of low end. You can cut that back really easily. Then you can also select the mid frequency point, anywhere from 200 hertz to 800 hertz. And that's what this control will actually move. I think it's what they call a constant Q, meaning that this is the center frequency, and then you can cut those center frequencies that way. The high is, I want to say this is somewhere around 4 or 5K. It adds a little extra brightness to it. From there, this EQ will then move into, if you have it enabled, to the graphic EQ. This graphic EQ is active. It can either do negative 15 dB of cut or positive 15 dB of boost. And this particular graphic EQ is based on the Tour series of amplifiers from Peavey. And in my experience, a little goes a long way. A little bit of boost, I think, that may be like 6 or 7 dB, for example. That's probably as much as you're going to need. Now, if you wanted to go pretty extreme, there is an issue. I'll go over that here in the next segment. But from after the graphic EQ, it'll then exit the graphic EQ and then go to your master volume. The resonance and presence controls, some people think of them as a low and high shelving EQ control. In reality, they're actually connected to the output transformer, and it has to do, and I've got to remember how this actually works, but my understanding from it is that it actually controls the damping factor of the transformer and the amplifier. So if you wanted to turn your resonance down, the amplifier will be a lot more boomy. It won't respond as tightly, for example, when you hit the strings, what you would typically expect from your tube amplifier. Or you can increase the resonance, and it'll be very tight, kind of like a solid state. And really, this is all set to taste. It's actually it's really cool to have these controls on there. The presence is more on the high end. It's again, it does damping factor at the higher frequencies. And again, I may not be explaining that exactly right, but these two controls are very important for your overall sound. Here's the unique foot switch. You can turn on your overdrive, you can turn on your compressor, the graphic EQ, and the mute function. On the inside with the preamps, so V1 handles the clean and overdrive channels, V2 handles the compressor circuit and the 3-band EQ here, and then V3 will handle the input and the output of the graphic EQ. I mentioned that there is an issue with this graphic EQ because what happens is that if you have a very extreme setting of EQ. For example, if I wanted an inverse smiley curve like that, the graphic EQ will actually cause audible distortion on the whole signal chain here. And the only way that I've been told to actually combat that is to put a lower gain tube in V3. You can actually experiment with the different tubes inside the preamp to get that lower gain setting, but V1 is a 12AX7, V2 is another 12AX7, and then V3 is a 12AT7, which tends to have a like a harsh tone, especially if it's overdriven. It also has a much higher plate current. Now, my understanding is that when this amplifier came out, it really, not so much on the gain is the issue, although that is a way to go and combat the issue that I'm describing here. It really comes down to the cathode biasing of the tubes, from the way that it was explained to me by one of the engineers, is that the tolerance of the tubes that were available at the time, some of these amplifiers may not actually clip at all. You might actually find that it's perfectly fine. Other ones, because of the tolerances, may actually cause the distortion to happen. And there was also an issue on this amplifier where there was an accidental 12AX7 put into V3, which 12AX7 has a very high gain, but it's also a very low plate current. There's a lot of different factors. I can talk for hours on I've gone through all this. There has been a suggestion where you can actually put in a 5751 tube to combat. It's a lower gain. It's very similar to a 12AX7, but it's got about 30% less gain, and that may very much solve the problem that I'm describing here. But in my experience, I've never had to do that kind of extreme EQ setting. For me, I usually just do a little bit of high, a little bit of low, less drastic of a smiley curve, and something like this is more than ample for me to get a really good tone out of this amplifier. One of the other technical issues of this amplifier is the muting circuit. Inside the amplifier preamp, you can actually mute from the front, or you can mute from the foot switch here. The components inside used for the muting circuit is maybe not the best choice. What it's actually using is, if you were to press the mute button as you engage it, you're going to hear a very annoying, a loud, audible pop coming from your speakers. And that's because there is a 12-volt relay inside that is disconnecting the preamp from the power amp and grounding out the preamp. As a result, that change of voltages is why you're hearing that pop. It's not really the best way to mute an audio signal. It works, but it's maybe not the best implementation. And that is one of the issues that you're going to have with this amplifier. Not a big deal, but it exists. The other issue that I've covered in my other video is that the XLR DI out. Now, the XLR, you can do either pre-EQ, where it'll take the signal and send it out to the PA system right off the input, and then you have post-EQ, which will send the signal after everything that's set up in your preamp. When it was set up, it was actually tapped off of pin 1 of V3, which is actually right before the graphic EQ. And unfortunately, there was a lot of noise from there, because there is supposed to be what they call an op amp to feed that signal from the graphic EQ over to the XLR DI out post EQ setting. As a result, it was only connected to it via a resistor through a white wire, and you were just getting a lot of noise because it was loading down that circuit too much, causing noise. And what the fix for that is what I did was I disconnected that white wire that's connected to pin 1 of V3, and then I went and then connected to pin 6, which is the other side of that V3 tube, and that has an operational amplifier, or an op amp as it's called, and that feeds the post EQ XLR, and it was also feeding the preamp out 1/4-inch jack on the back. And the interesting thing is that when I came up with that fix, it turns out when I looked at the schematics for the VBMA, they made that exact change over in the VBMA. It was already corrected. As far as technical issues are concerned, that's the only ones that I have come across on this amplifier, and all are easily fixable. and they're fairly minor in the greater scheme of things. I set my power tubes to 26 milliamps per tube for the bias setting, and that is the recommendation of John Fields. And I believe the other engineers that were involved in making both these amplifiers, I know Bobby Baldwin was involved in that, and also Steve Everett. Each of them had a role in getting these amplifiers designed and put together. So thank you to those guys. Overall, in my experience with the sound, I really love the clean channel. I've really gotten used to getting a nice tube sound from the clean channel, and that to me is probably better than all the other amplifiers that I have. On the dirty channel, it can be very bright. It can be almost harsh at times, and that can easily be dialed out. You can bring down your highs a little bit, but it's gruesomely loud. I mean, crazy loud. Even with my 210, which is what I use most often these days, I do have a 410 and a 15 downstairs in my basement. I used to have another 1x15 that went underneath my 210 for years, and just to be able to play this through my 210, and I played through that stack downstairs just for ha-has, for fun. I really don't take out that big rig as much anymore, but man, this thing is super, super loud. Couldn't ask for anything more out of a tube amplifier. Given how unique this one is, I'm just very happy to be able to own it, and really, I mean, I don't think there's much else to say. I mean, if you guys have any opinions on this, have you ever tried it, please let me know in the comments. Moving on here to the VBMA, this is the evolution of the VB-3 in terms of features within the preamp. It does have a foot switch, and as you can see, it actually has two channels and then a pseudo third channel where it blends the overdrive and the clean channel together. You can engage the overdrive, you can engage the blend channel, and the graphic EQ, and then the mute, respectively. Some of the literature on this amplifier shows that it has the compressor like on the VB3. It does not have the compressor that was removed. Now in this preamp, I'm going to have to look on the other side of my camera here to look at my notes, because you actually get an additional 12AX7 for the VBMA. So you actually have 4 tubes in the preamp section. There are 3 12AX7s, and then the 4th one is an AT7, not including the AX7 and the AT7 that is on the power amp board. And so that extra tube inside the preamp, so what we're going to do is I'll kind of go through how it's outlined here on these schematics. So the 12AX7 in V1 handles the clean channel gain. So on both sides of that tube, that's being handled for the clean channel. V2 handles the overdrive and also the blend channel there for V2. That's a 12AX7. The V3 is a 12AX7, and that will handle the 3-band passive EQ, so low, mid, high, and then you have your mid shift right here. Then next you have, on the other side of that, is the pre-gain into the graphic EQ, which drives the input of the graphic EQ. Finally, V4 is a 12AT7, which is at the end of the graphic EQ, and then the second side of V4 is a final gain stage that will go to the master volume, which heads out to the power amp board. So they split up the duties a little bit more. Again, you do not have the tube compressor in this model amplifier. Here we are on back of the amplifiers. This is the VBMA, and then this is the VB3. You can see the layout of the tubes on the back panel here on the VB3. You have your 12AX7, so it goes V1, V2, and then V3, which is your 12AT7. You could try a 5751 in there, or a low gain 12AX7 if you can find one for the graphic EQ issue. You have your 12AX7, which is your phase inverter, I believe. Nope. Yes, it is. It is actually a 12AX7 for a split load phase inverter. And then the 12AT7 is the follower tube, push-pull, for the power drive here. And again, you can use EL34s, 6L6s. There's a bias switch right here that will allow you to change the bias range setting for that. Or you can use the 6CA7s and over here is your IEC connector. The cool thing about these amplifiers is that they can either work at 120 volts or 240 volts. You just would have to change the the fuse level, I believe here. Instead of a 10 amp, I think you only need a 5 amp fuse if it was on 240 volts, for example. But then this whole panel comes off. You can get access to a lot of the stuff. And then over here is your, typical of what you would find on most amplifiers. You got your impedance selector. You got these combo speaker connectors, either 1/4 inch or speak on. And then you set your impedance here. And over here is the setting for the lights. Some people may not like the lights, so you can actually turn these off if you really wanted to. The level here refers to the XLR DI out. You have a buffer tuner send. You have your effects loop right here. The power amp and the preamp output, some people may treat that as another effects loop, but the cool thing is that now the preamp out is now the same as the XLR post EQ, and those are basically in parallel running by an op amp, and that was the fix to make sure that this XLR is nice and clean. And finally, here on the back of the VBMA, you got a couple extra stickers, made in the USA. I think that's pretty cool. The preamp has a little bit different because it's got that extra tube. You have your 12AX7s and then your 12AT7 on the back wall inside. So you got V1, V2, V3, and then V4, and then your power amp section is the same. And then over here is all the same outputs and controls as the VB3. The technical issues that I've come across on the VBMA are very few, and the few that I can think of are extremely minor. The first thing that I'm aware of is that when you are using the blend channel tends to lose some overall volume, and that is usually because it's going through multiple gain stages. And the way you can go and make up the gain is either you can increase it on the graphic EQ here, you can increase the volume here, which the way the overdrive is set up, these are your pre-volumes for your overdrive and clean channels. And then you have your post volume here before it goes into the blend section, the blend stage for the clean and overdrive. You can make your adjustments here if you feel that drop in volume, and it's very small. It's probably less than 3 dB, probably maybe 1 or 2 decibels at the very most, and you can adjust it with either the graphic or adjust it here. And that's really been my only issue that I've run into with this amplifier head. Now, the only other one that in common with the VB3 is that it can still have potentially the same issue with overdriving your signal with the graphic EQ. And it would be a lot harder to solve on the VBMA. And I really shouldn't say that it needs to be solved because it's not broken. The issue that is going on with the graphic EQ for both these amplifiers is not so much the gain, it's actually the specs of the tubes are being used. The production tubes that are made today, it's inconsistent. You can have 100 gain for a 12AX7 made in China, then that same batch could have another one that could be 85, could be slightly different specs. Then you'd have to change. The way to do it properly is that instead of changing out the tubes, you would actually have to go in and change the resistor values of the cathode and plate resistors to change the bias of that tube so that so they're running the way they need to. And 99% of the time, no one's going to really go that far. You really only need a little bit of travel in this graphic EQ to really get that sound that you're looking for. If you want to go and get that Geezer Butler overdrive, like honky overdrive tone in the mid-range, you can either make modifications to the amp, as I mentioned, or you can run the power amp in and preamp out, run a separate graphic EQ if you really wanted to get that tone, and then you can adjust the overall gain so that it does not clip your signal chain. Some of the improvements made between the VB3 and the VBMA, not going to get too technical with that, but what I can tell you is that I mentioned the muting circuit uses a relay. Here in the VB3 you get that audible pop. Here in the VBMA, you do not get that. They actually corrected that issue, and they, instead of using a 12-volt relay, that grounds out the preamp to the power amp. They actually use a set of transistors which can switch on and off far faster than a physical relay can, and it uses a fade type of circuit to where you no longer get that audible pop when you engage the mute circuit, and that is an upgrade that you can get here in the VBMA. There is also some extra noise suppression components within the preamp. I'm not going to get too technical with that, but suffice to say, especially when you're dealing with blending two channels together, that can potentially add some noise. There's some noise suppression components added into the preamp section for the blend channel to make sure that it's not overly hissy, white noise, that kind of thing. And that is in the VBMA. I find the overdrive tone of the VBMA to be a little bit darker than the VB3. The VB3 doesn't have as much adjustability as the VBMA. I know Michael Anthony, when he wanted that blend channel, he wanted to have a little bit more tone control over it in addition to the blend. So this is really where you have that extra adjustability in this tone knob. You got the VB3 by itself has a lot of that gritty growl tone. It can get very aggressive, let's put it that way. You can actually dial it back on the VB3 by adjusting your EQ, but you can actually do it here on the VBMA at the pre-gain stage here with the channel without messing with the EQ here or the graphic EQ here. It's just a matter of preference. I think that you can get pretty much the same type of overdrive sound. You just get a little bit more flexibility with the blend channel. I really think that the blend channel is a benefit. When you are using the overdrive channel of either amplifier, you do lose a little bit of low ends, like some sub low ends, say 40 hertz or below 60 hertz, for example. And that clean channel blended back in really does bring back that low end oomph. And that is the advantage that you have with the VBMA. Again, you know, with the VB3, the overdrive channel, if you are lacking that little bit of low end, I don't see how you would be lacking much low end at all, given how powerful and loud these amplifiers are. You can easily make that adjustment on the VB3's graphic EQ or on the low end knob here. The final technical aspect I wanted to touch upon is the cooling fans. There's actually two cooling fans for each of these amplifiers. The cold air is drawn in here, and this is where the switch mode power supply module is. There's a fan that is drawing cold air across those components. The air will then go into the center chamber where the power tubes and the preamp tubes are, and then that hot air is evacuated out the top. And some have complained, and I can understand that concern, that this fan here is just begging to have something spilt and drip down inside the amplifier there. I mean, it kind of is it's a sacrifice that you have to make in order to make these amplifiers weigh the 37 pounds that they are. You know, you can't put anything on top of it. So like I have a rack set up, for example, for my Max 700 with all my SansAmp drivers and my EQs and my tuners and all that stuff. I couldn't do that with this particular amplifier, but I honestly don't need all that extra stuff to be running through any of these amplifiers. So just keep that in mind. They are not overly loud. You're not going to hear them at a gig. You might hear them a little bit, you know, in a small rehearsal space, for example, but it's not that big of a deal to me. But I thought it was interesting that there's actually two fans, not just the one on top that you see. Thank you guys for bearing with me through much of this video. I know that the technical specs and everything can get kind of boring, but now I'm going to be moving to the next segment here, which is, what does this amplifier sound like? I'm going to hook up my Peavey USB mixer and connect it directly to the camera, and you're going to hear the DI out signal from the VBMA. You can check out my other video on the VB3. I've done a couple sound samples there, and what we're going to do is we're going to hook this up here and see what this sounds like. Going to do the clean and the overdrive channels. We'll check out the blend channel, and hopefully you guys can get a good idea of what this amplifier sounds like. Okay, we have the VBMA connected to my 210. Everything's ready to go, and I'm just going to quickly show you the power up sequence here. And it actually is like a soft start. What'll happen is that you'll hear the relays, the click inside, you'll hear the fans start slow and then work their way up. And obviously I'll let it warm up for a few minutes before I turn on the standby. Well, the fans are pretty much at full power. I don't think that's very loud at all.
All right, guys, I think I got everything set up here, and the VBMA is all powered and warmed up. It's been running for about 15 minutes. I've been playing around with it off camera just so I can get a sound so I can demo it for you. Hopefully you guys can see me okay in frame. I am using a Music Man by Sterling 4-string bass, and it has the double humbuckers here. And right now I will be using the both coils at once, and then the other settings that I like most on this bass besides that is the Music Man just at the bridge pickup. And then I also like to set it to position, I believe it's position 2, where it uses the 2 inner coils. I have a modest smiley curve here set up on the VBMA's graphic EQ, and we have the blend channel at 50%, so a pretty balanced setup there. I'm going to leave pretty much everything almost flat, maybe with a little bit of boost on the lows, mids, highs on the 3-band. And I'll take a good picture of this so you can see some of the settings, but hopefully what will be beneficial to hear is how this amplifier sounds through the DI. It is right now routed to post EQ, meaning that it will grab the signal right after the graphic EQ. If I was to set a pre EQ, which would grab it right here at the input, that is an extremely hot signal, I just realized. So the output volume is about halfway up on the DI out, and the PV6 mixer, I have the overall volume down a little bit just so I don't clip anything. I'm not sure how this is going to sound when it gets on YouTube, but it may sound a little compressed. But if you are interested in hearing some of the audio clips, please let me know. I can always send them to you. So I'm going to go and play a couple bass lines, and we'll run through the clean and dirty channels and also the blend channel. Here's a good close-up of what's going on with the amplifier. So the clean volume is at 4, overdrive volume is at 4, tone, overdrive volume, and the blend are all at 12 o'clock. We have a boost on the lows at 7, mids at 8, mid shift at 800 hertz, and then the highs at 8 as well, and then that smiley curve. The resonance actually is all the way down to 1, and then the presence is up to 7. So I could get a heck of a lot more low end out of this very easily by increasing that resonance control. And obviously we have the master volume down for recording purposes. Hopefully this gives you guys an idea of what this amplifier sounds like.
Okay, everyone, I'm going to wrap it up here, and just wanted to say thank you for supporting the channel and for bearing with me. I know this wound up being a little bit longer of a video than I usually do, and I've actually turned off the overhead lights so you can kind of see this at night and see how the red background looks. And actually the settings that are on the preamp now is what I would typically use when I'm playing live. And I really think that this amplifier is probably one of the better live amplifiers that I have, maybe the best at this point. But the VB-3 I still have a lot of love for as well. It's because it was the first tube amplifier that I ever got. But any questions, please let me know. And thank you so much again for watching and supporting the channel. Till the next time.